The woman's screams were nearly drowned out by the roar of the fire. Diesel fumes burned the back of his throat as heat rolled off the charter bus in suffocating waves. Safety glass glittered across the asphalt like a field of broken stars. Someone was pounding on a side window from the inside, bare hand, slapping desperately against the dark. "Please, somebody. She's still in there." Mark Delaney didn't remember deciding to move. One second he was standing under the flickering canopy lights of the truck stop, rain hammering the brim of his ball cap. The next he was sprinting toward the bus boots skidding on slick pavement, heart thundering louder than the sirens in the distance. Flames licked up from the engine compartment, orange tongues tasting the night. The driver was sprawled on the ground, dazed blood running down his cheek. A gas hose lay snapped in half near the pump fuel, puddling out in a slow, deadly river. "Back up, everybody back up," somebody yelled behind him. Mark didn't slow down. He could see her now through the blackening glass. A woman in her 30s, hair matted with blood pinned sideways between two seats, twisted from the impact. Smoke poured in around her like a living thing. She coughed, choked, tried to raise an arm that wouldn't move. The air felt thick and wrong. He knew what happened when fuel vapors met open flame. He'd seen it overseas, up close. "Get away from there, man," a trucker shouted. "It's gonna blow." Mark grabbed the twisted emergency door handle and felt the blistering heat bite straight through his calloused palms. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the woman's eyes locking on his through the haze, wet and wild and pleading. Somewhere past the chaos, he could hear his daughter screaming his name. "Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from tonight and hit that like and subscribe button if you believe courage still matters in this world." On most days, Mark Delaney looked like any worn-out guy you'd see in line at a Dollar General. He was 37, tall, but a little stooped from years of lifting what shouldn't be lifted alone. His jeans were always frayed at the cuffs, his faded warehouse polo permanently dusted with cardboard lint. Every afternoon at 4, his beat-up gray pickup rolled out of the county distribution center and headed back toward the edge of town, where the houses gave up and the fields took over. Home was a tired, single-wide trailer outside Amarillo, parked on a rented patch of dirt that turned to either dust or mud, and never much in between. Inside it was cramped but clean. A thrift store couch, a kitchen table with one wobbly leg, a fridge held together with magnets and school drawings. The best part of that trailer was 10 years old and missing her front tooth on the left. Lucy Delaney had his brown eyes and her mama's crooked grin. She was in 5th grade, obsessed with astronomy, and convinced that if she just wished hard enough, they'd one day afford a telescope that could actually see the rings of Saturn. Every night, she taped another hand-drawn star to the ceiling above her bunk, filling the sagging paneling with a sky of her own making. Mark worked nights, because nights paid an extra $1.50 an hour. Forklifts, pallets, metal racks that stretched up toward the fluorescent buzzing. He liked the routine of it, the repetition. Forward lift, reverse, set down again. Anything that kept his mind from drifting backward to places with too much sand and too many sirens. Before the warehouse, he'd been Staff Sergeant Delaney, U.S. Army medic. Afghanistan, twice, Iraq, once. He'd patched holes in men who were barely old enough to vote. He'd ridden in the back of rattling armored vehicles with his hands inside someone's chest, praying to a god he wasn't sure he believed in anymore. He came home with a back that protested every morning and a head that wouldn't quite settle down at night. And with one more absence carved into his life. 5 years earlier, a routine drive home had turned into a funeral when a drunk driver blew a red light and took Emily Delaney away in a screech of metal and glass. Mark had been in the passenger seat, close enough to see the light, close enough to live too far to do anything that mattered. Should have been me, he'd told himself so often it stopped sounding like words, and more like a fact etched somewhere behind his ribs. Since then, his mission had shrunk down to one thing: keep Lucy safe. That was it. No more heroics, no more charging into danger so somebody could pin a ribbon on his chest and send him home to an empty house. He clocked in. He clocked out. He made sure the bills were mostly paid and that there was always food in the pantry, even if some of it came from the church box. On Friday nights, if his overtime didn't get canceled, he and Lucy had a ritual. They'd drive into town, hit the 24-hour truck stop off the interstate, and split a grilled cheese and fries at the chrome-trimmed diner inside. She loved watching the big rigs rumble in and out, guessing where each one was headed. California, she'd declare, pointing at a shiny blue cab. That one's full of surfboards. Nah, he'd counter potatoes. They laughed more on those nights than any others. That particular Friday started the same. Greasy plates, bad coffee, a shared piece of pie when he felt reckless. The sky outside the big plate glass windows went from pink to bruised purple as a storm muscled its way in over the flat Texas plains. By the time they walked out under the canopy lights toward his truck, the wind was howling hard enough to rattle the gas station signs, and rain came at them sideways in sharp, cold sheets. That's when the charter bus pulled in too fast, tires hissing on the wet pavement, its headlights cutting a shaky path through the downpour. It swung wide, clipped the edge of the concrete island, and in a spray of sparks and metal, slammed crooked to a stop right by the pumps. Mark saw the way the front end crumpled. He saw the way the driver's head hit the wheel. And he saw the first thin line of flame sneak out from under the hood, hungry and bright in the dark. Mark didn't remember much after the first flash of fire, only motion shouting and the cold slap of rain hitting his neck as he pulled the woman free of the wrecked bus. By the time first responders finally arrived, he was coughing smoke out of his lungs, sitting on the curb with a damp blanket around his shoulders, Lucy clinging to his side and refusing to let go. They insisted on checking him over. They checked the woman, too. Her name was Jenna Walker, a school administrator from Tulsa on her way to visit family. She kept trying to thank him through her oxygen mask, but the EMTs kept telling her to save her breath. They loaded her into the ambulance first. Mark eventually stood knees cracking, joints stiff, and lifted Lucy into the truck. She leaned her head on his shoulder, the adrenaline crash already dragging her down. He kissed the top of her hair as she drifted off and drove home slow under the still spitting sky. He didn't expect anything after that night. He didn't want anything. He wasn't a headline, wasn't a hero, just a man who reacted before thinking. 2 days later, everything changed. It started small little looks at work, forklifts slowing as he passed, conversations stopping. 3 guys from shipping stood in a cluster near the time clock, whispering with their eyes flicked toward him like he carried some invisible radioactivity. During first break, his supervisor, Todd Monroe, called him into the office. Todd was 39, the kind of man who wore sunglasses indoors and talked loudly so people would know he talked loudly. "You really cause a scene over the weekend," Delaney Todd said, leaning back in his rolling chair like a king surveying a servant. "Corporate called me about you." Mark blinked. "About me? Why?" Todd smirked. "Seems a certain internet video is circulating. Somebody at that truck stop caught the whole thing on their phone. You rushing into that bus like Rambo." He chuckled. "Viral, man. You're practically famous." Mark felt his stomach drop. "I didn't want that." "Doesn't matter. Todd said, shrugging in a way that made Mark want to put a wall between them. The company's got concerns. Liability, publicity image. HR wants to know if you acted with, how'd they say it? Sound judgment. He stared at Todd. A bus was on fire. A woman was trapped. Hey, don't get all worked up, Todd said, lifting his hands like Mark might strike him. All I'm saying is when you got employees running toward explosions, lawyers start thinking you're unstable. That word unstable hit like a punch. Mark kept his voice even. I did what anyone would do. Todd snorted. No, you didn't. Normal people wait for professionals. Normal people don't make the evening news. A slow burn of shame and anger crawled up Mark's spine. He'd heard versions of those lines before, whispered in VA waiting rooms, muttered by people who didn't understand the way instincts rewired themselves after combat. Todd folded his arms. Look, corporate's reviewing your status. Might need you to take a leave until the dust settles. A leave paid or unpaid. Todd gave that smirk again, the one that said he enjoyed power more than paychecks. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. HR will call you. Mark swallowed hard. I need this job. Everyone needs something, Todd said, spinning his chair away. Clock back in. And keep your head down, okay? Last thing we need is some PTSD moment on the warehouse floor. Mark froze. He didn't remember leaving the office. Didn't remember walking past the guys in shipping who suddenly found it fascinating to stare at the ground. Didn't remember picking up his pallet list or getting back on the forklift. What he did remember was Lucy. Always Lucy. That night she sat at the kitchen table homework, spread out in front of her, humming the tune she always hummed when she concentrated. He cooked dinner with the stiff movements of someone carrying invisible bricks on his back. Daddy, Lucy asked softly. She pushed her pencil aside. A kid today at school said you're famous. Is that true? Mark felt his chest tighten. Who told you that Natalie's big brother showed her a video? She looked down, fingers worrying a frayed corner of her notebook. She said you ran into a fire, and that people online think you're crazy brave. She paused. Some think you're just crazy. A jolt went through him. No one should be talking to you about that. Her voice got even smaller. Is it bad? No, Mark said quickly. No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. She nodded, but he could see the worry in her eyes. Lucy carried emotions like they were fragile, precious things she had to protect. She hesitated again. Are you in trouble at work? He didn't answer at first. The silence said enough. Lucy slid off her chair and wrapped her arms around his waist. He put a hand on her back, staring at the chipped paint on the cabinets, feeling utterly hollow. The next day, the pressure doubled. A glossy black SUV was waiting near the warehouse entrance. A woman stepped out, sharp suit hair, pinned neat eyes the color of polished slate. She introduced herself as Valerie Cross from Community Safety Oversight, a private auditing firm the company hired to evaluate risk. She looked Mark over like he was a puzzle piece she wasn't sure belonged in the box. We just need a conversation, she said, leading him to a conference room. Nothing formal yet. The interview went sideways fast. She asked about the bus, about his decision-making, about whether he felt compelled to intervene. Then questions slid toward his past service deployments, stressful moments, counseling medications. How often do you feel on edge, Mr. Delaney? Do you ever find yourself reacting impulsively to perceived threats? When is the last time you experienced a flashback? Mark clenched his hands in his lap until his knuckles ached. This feels more like an interrogation. She smiled a tight, professional smile. "Just gathering information. Your employer has the right to ensure the safety of their workforce." He knew what she was really saying. They wanted a reason to bench him. Maybe worse. That evening, as he and Lucy pulled into the trailer park, he saw their neighbor Walt Henderson leaning against his porch railing with a handful of other residents. Walt had lived there longer than most gray beard beer belly permanently annoyed expression. He was a loud talker, especially after a few cans of cheap lager. "There he is," Walt announced when Mark stepped out of the truck. "Hero of the month." The others chuckled. Mark felt his jaw tighten. "You planning to save the whole town now?" Delaney Walt said. "Gonna run into any burning building you see, maybe jump in front of a train next. Folks like you can't stop playing soldier." Mark didn't rise to it. He never rose to it. Lucy pressed close to him, as if she could hide behind his shadow. Walt kept going. "That stuff you did overseas, man, it ain't normal life. You might want to remember that before somebody gets hurt." Mark's vision tunneled for half a second. Not rage, not the old combat rush, just pain. He guided Lucy toward the trailer, ignoring the murmurs behind him. Inside, Lucy grabbed her backpack and pretended to rummage through it, but Mark could see her shoulders shaking. He crouched beside her. "Hey, look at me." When she did, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Why are people being mean to you?" He couldn't answer. Not honestly. Not without giving her fears new shapes. "Sometimes folks talk when they don't understand," he said softly. "But you saved somebody." Her voice cracked. "Isn't that good?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, it is." "Then why does everyone treat you like you did something wrong?" He didn't have an answer for that either. The pressure kept building. By Wednesday morning, HR officially placed him on temporary suspension pending evaluation. No pay, no guaranteed timeline, no apologizing for the humiliation. Todd handed him the paperwork with the smugness of a man who enjoyed watching others fall. "Just protocol," Todd said. "Nothing personal, nothing personal." Mark felt the floor sway beneath him. Rent, utilities, groceries, Lucy's school fees. His mind raced through numbers that didn't add up. Not even close. He signed the suspension notice. He didn't trust his voice enough to speak. When he stepped out into the warehouse parking lot, the wind cut sharper than it should have. He leaned his hands on the roof of his old pickup, breathing slowly, fighting the tremor in his chest. At Lucy's school pickup line that afternoon, he tried to smile. Tried to act normal. She climbed into the truck, quietly. Too quietly. "What's wrong?" he asked. Her lip quivered. "Kid said you can't come to the school barbecue because you're dangerous." Mark felt each word like a blade. He reached for her hand. "That's not true." "But they said doesn't matter what they said," he said gently. "What matters is truth." She nodded, but her small fingers tightened around his like she was afraid he'd disappear if she let go. He drove home, feeling the weight of everything pressing against him. Employers, neighbors, strangers online, other parents. The world shrinking around him, the air getting thinner. That night, as Lucy slept curled against her stuffed owl, Mark sat alone at the kitchen table with the lights low. The sound of the wind sliding under the trailer skirting felt louder than usual, like the whole place might lift and blow away. His hands shook slightly. He pressed his palms flat against the table to steady them. Everything was slipping out of his control. His name, his job, his reputation dragged through mud because he'd walked toward someone in danger. He was tired. Bone tired. But the moment the thought crossed his mind, giving up, backing down, Lucy's voice echoed in his head. "Isn't saving someone good?" He looked toward her room. the thin door with the taped-up star drawings. He couldn't let this break her. She'd already lost too much. At midnight, a hard knock rattled the trailer door. Mark rose slowly, pulse climbing. He pulled aside the curtain just enough to see headlights washing over the yard, dark shapes shifting outside. Someone called his name. Not angry, not frantic, just urgent. The pressure in Mark's chest tightened into a single inevitable point. Whatever was on the other side of that door, it was going to change everything. Mark opened the trailer door just enough to see who stood outside, the chain still latched. Rain misted around a tall figure hunched under a county deputy's jacket. Behind him, 2 patrol cars idled their red and blue lights, muted but pulsing across the gravel like slow heartbeats. "Mr. Delaney," the deputy said, adjusting his brim. "We need to speak with you, urgently." The air in Mark's lungs stopped moving. He scanned the yard, saw motion near the corner of the trailer. Another deputy, hands resting near his belt, not aggressive, but alert. "What's this about?" Mark asked, keeping his voice low so Lucy wouldn't wake. "We received a report involving you and a situation over at the Brazos Ridge Community Center." The deputy paused, choosing his words. "You're not in trouble, but your name came up in connection with someone in danger. Someone asking for you." "For me?" The deputy nodded. "A woman named Jenna Walker." Mark felt heat rise through his chest. "She's supposed to be in a hospital." "She checked herself out this morning," the deputy said. "Came here looking for you according to the folks at the center. She said she needed your help." And then, he hesitated. Then things went sideways. A bad feeling tightened in Mark's gut. What happened? She was meeting with county officials about the bus accident, insurance review, liability questions, all that. Something about video evidence. A small group of people started causing a scene inside the center. "Protesters, we think." Anti-vet groups stirred up online. He lowered his voice. "They locked the doors from the outside." Mark's jaw clenched. "Locked them in." The deputy nodded. "Building's old. Sprinkler system's been faulty for years. One of the agitators set off a smoke bomb. Not a real fire, but enough to blind people and trigger a panic. We've evacuated part of the building, but there's a back section no one's gotten into yet. They said Jenna was in there, and she asked for you by name." A pulse hammered in Mark's ears. He knew how crowds reacted in enclosed spaces. He'd seen it in places far from Texas rooms, filling with smoke fear, turning orderly people into stampeding chaos. "Why me?" he whispered. "Because she said you'd know what to do," the deputy answered. Before Mark could reply, a small voice drifted from behind him. Daddy Lucy stood in the hallway, hair tousled, holding her stuffed owl. "Oh, baby," he murmured. "Go back to bed." She shook her head. "Who's at the door?" The deputy softened his posture. "Everything's okay, sweetheart. We just need your dad to help with something important." Lucy looked at her father, and Mark saw the fear blooming in her eyes, not fear for herself, but for him. The same fear that lived in the spaces between her questions and his silences. He closed the door enough that only a sliver of rainlight came through. He crouched in front of her. "I need to go for a little bit. Someone's in trouble." "You're not going to get hurt, right?" she whispered. He brushed his thumb across her cheek. "I promise I'll come back." She pressed her forehead to his. "Please." That word, please, lodged inside him like an anchor. It didn't pull him down. It held him steady. He grabbed his jacket from the hook, kissed her forehead, and walked out into the rain. The deputies drove fast sirens off, cutting through the dark toward Brazos Ridge. The community center sat at the edge of town, a squat building from the 70s, all faded brick and aluminum trim. As they approached, Mark saw a crowd gathered behind police tape, restless shadows shifting under the floodlights. Smoke trickled out from a side door. An ambulance idled nearby. A firefighter slammed his fist against a jammed back entrance. The deputy pointed. "That wing's sealed. We've tried to get in, but the old fire door's locked automatically, and the smoke makes it impossible to see. We think 3, maybe 4 people are still inside." "What about the power?" Mark asked. "Cut. Backup lights are flickering. Visibility's near 0. A young officer jogged over. "There's movement inside," he said. "We heard banging against the far door, but the mechanism's rusted. Won't budge." Mark studied the building. He'd been here before school fundraisers' holiday drives. The layout was simple, long hall storage closets, a rec room, a kitchen, and a back wing with old classrooms. "What started it?" Mark asked. The firefighter shook his head. "Smoke bombs. Stupid prank or something more targeted, we don't know. But panic set in fast. We got most out, not them." A cold wind rattled the metal gutters. The building groaned like an old ship straining against a storm. Mark took a step forward. The deputy caught his arm. "You don't have to do this." He met the deputy's eyes. "Yes, I do. Not for Jenna. Not for the deputies. For Lucy, because he had to show her that fear wasn't stronger than doing what was right. Because he couldn't let another person die in front of him while he stood still." He pulled off his jacket and covered his nose with the collar. "Give me a flashlight." "Something bright." They handed him a heavy-duty industrial one. He tested the beam. Solid. He jogged toward the side entrance, the one the firefighters had been trying to pry open. "Give me space," he said. The firefighter stepped back. "You know there's no going in halfway, right?" "Once you're inside, I know," Mark said. He lowered his shoulder, grabbed a protruding hinge, and with a grunt that tore through his ribs, he forced the door just wide enough to slip through. Heat hit him first. Not flames, thank God, but hot smoke thick enough to coat his tongue. The floor tiles were wet from sprinklers sputtering overhead. The emergency lights flickered red, then dark, then red again. He moved low, sweeping the flashlight beam across the hall. "Jenna," he yelled. "If you can hear me, call out." Faintly muffled, he heard something, a cough, a thud, a weak attempt at speech. He followed the noise, skimming along the wall, his hand trailing against peeling paint. The smoke thickened near the intersection where the hall split. One direction led to the gym. The other, the direction of the banging, led to the old classroom wing. He took that way. Halfway down, he found the first person, a custodian slumped against a doorframe, eyes watering, body limp. Mark knelt, pressed 2 fingers to the man's neck. Pulse, thready, but there. He lifted the custodian under the arms, dragged him to the wall nearest the exit, propped him up, and kept moving. "Jenna!" he shouted. A voice answered hoarse. "In here. Please help." He reached the last door in the corridor. The glass window was black with soot. Something heavy blocked it from the inside. He braced himself, kicked hard near the latch. The wood splintered. He kicked again. The door swung open, bumping into a metal shelving unit tipped over from the panic. Behind it, crouched near the floor, were 3 people. Jenna, a teenage boy, and an elderly woman in a cardigan soaked with sprinkler water. Jenna tried to stand, but collapsed halfway. I thought... "Save it," Mark said, hauling the shelf out of the way. "We need to move." The elderly woman wheezed. The boy coughed so hard he nearly retched. Mark slid an arm under the older woman's shoulders, lifted her gently but firmly. "Stay with me," he said. "Eyes up. Slow breaths." He turned to Jenna. "Can you walk?" "I think so," she whispered, gripping the wall. "I'm sorry I didn't know this would." "No time," Mark said, shaking his head. "You take the boy's arm. Keep him upright." They moved into the hall. The smoke seemed thicker now, as if the building exhaled every breath it could no longer hold. Mark pushed them forward, step by step, breath by breath. Halfway to the exit, a ceiling tile crashed down behind them. Fire alarms screeched. The boy whimpered. Jenna tightened her grip on him. Mark didn't look back. He kept his focus on the sliver of light under the side door, the only anchor point in a world of red haze. The elderly woman sagged. Her knees buckled. Mark lifted her, cradling her weight against his hip, like Lucy when she was a toddler. He felt something twist in his lower back, but he didn't slow. "Almost there," he said. "Stay awake." She blinked hard. "I'm trying." The exit door appeared ahead. The deputy's silhouette flashed beyond it. Mark lunged forward, slammed his shoulder into the metal bar, and the door burst open with a howl. Cold night air rushed around them. Deputies and EMTs swarmed. The boy was taken first, then the elderly woman. Jenna staggered, caught herself on a stretcher, then turned back toward Mark with smoke-streaked cheeks. "You came," she whispered. He didn't answer. Couldn't. His lungs burned. His eyes broiled with tears he chalked up to the smoke. The firefighter standing nearby looked at him like something almost reverent had shifted behind his eyes. The deputy who brought him here stepped forward, stunned. "Delaney, you got all of them." Mark nodded once, and then he heard a sound that froze him. A small voice. A gasp. "Daddy." Lucy broke through the tape tears, streaming barreling into him before anyone could stop her. He dropped to his knees and hugged her so tight his arms trembled. She buried her face in his chest. "You came back. You promised." "I always will," he whispered into her hair, voice ragged. "Always." Behind them, EMTs called vitals radios crackled the building, smoked like a giant coughing its last. But every eye, every deputy, every firefighter, every onlooker was on Mark. Not the suspended worker, not the unstable vet, not the man whispered about behind cupped hands. They saw him as something else. A man who walked back into a burning maze for strangers. A man who kept every promise he ever made to the people he loved. A man who didn't wait to be called a hero. He simply acted like one. And the balance of power in the story of his life shifted in that breath the moment the world finally saw what his daughter had known all along. The smoke still bled from the gaps in the roof when the last ambulance pulled away. Rain hissed against the pavement, washing the soot into thin gray rivers. Deputies moved in slow circles, gathering statements, checking their radios, glancing every few seconds toward the man sitting on the tailgate of a fire truck with his daughter curled into his side. Mark didn't feel heroic. His hands shook from the aftershock the way they always did when his adrenaline drained too fast. His head pounded. His lungs burned. Lucy kept her palm pressed against his chest like she was making sure his heart still beat. People hovered nearby, watching him, whispering. The teenage boy he'd helped carry out stood with a blanket around his shoulders, staring at Mark like he was some kind of miracle. The elderly woman dabbed her eyes with tissues someone had given her. Jenna approached slowly, one arm wrapped around her ribs. She looked different now, not the frightened woman he pulled from the smoke, but someone seeing him clearly for the first time. "Doctors say the smoke didn't get too deep," she said softly, "because you got to us fast." Mark nodded, but didn't trust his voice. Lucy leaned closer. Deputies stepped aside as a group of county officials emerged, coughing into sleeves, still shaken. They whispered among themselves while looking at Mark with a mixture of disbelief and something very close to remorse. One of them, a man in a navy blazer who'd barely spared Mark a glance earlier, cleared his throat. "Mr. Delaney." I don't think any of us would be standing here without you. Mark didn't answer. He wasn't doing this for them. He hadn't stormed into that building for applause. He'd done it because of one person. Lucy. The deputy who'd come to his door earlier walked up, hands on his hips. We checked the security footage, he said. The agitators who caused this, they didn't expect anyone to push into that wing. They counted on panic confusion. You cut right through it. He let out a breath, almost a laugh. I don't know how you learned to read a crisis like that. Mark stared at the gravel beneath his boots. He didn't want to talk about Afghanistan, or Iraq, or the men he couldn't pull out fast enough. Those ghosts had lived in him so long he wasn't sure where they ended, and he began. He brushed a hand over Lucy's hair. Just did what needed doing, he said. But it was too late. People had begun to notice the way he moved, the way he gave directions inside the smoke without hesitation, the way he'd kept the group calm, the way he had carried that elderly woman like she weighed nothing. There was a kind of memory in the way his hands steadied the injured. Someone murmured, "He's done this before." Another whispered, "He trained for something." That wasn't luck. And just like that, the air shifted. It was Jenna who asked the question that broke everything open. She stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. "Mark, how did you know how to navigate that building blind? How did you keep us breathing right? How did you—" Her voice cracked. "How did you know exactly what to do?" Lucy looked up at him too, waiting, trusting. For years, he'd kept his service tucked into the corners of conversation. Most people at the warehouse barely knew he'd deployed. None of them knew the details. They only knew the rumors that he was high-strung, that he had a past, that Todd liked to joke he carried the desert in his eyes. But here in this parking lot full of people who had seen him crawl through fire for strangers, the truth didn't feel like a burden anymore. He drew in a breath, slow and steady. "I was an Army medic," he said. 13 years. 3 tours. A hush fell. He didn't look away from Jenna, or from his daughter's small, steady eyes. "I learned to move through smoke," he went on. "Through buildings half-collapsed. Through places where one wrong step—" He shook his head. "I guess some things stay with you." The crowd was still. Even the rain felt quieter. Blazerman stepped forward, throat bobbing. "And we suspended you. We questioned your judgment." Jenna shot him a look sharp enough to slice glass. The official swallowed hard, his face flushed. "Mr. Delaney, I'm ashamed, truly. The county owes you far more than an apology." Then came others, slowly at first. A firefighter with soot smeared across his cheeks, a deputy who'd earlier eyed Mark with suspicion, the paramedic who'd loaded the elderly woman into the ambulance. Each of them looked at him with something new in their eyes. Respect. They didn't see an unstable warehouse worker now. They saw what he had been hiding for years, a man who had already walked through hell, and tonight walked right back in for people he'd never met. The power dynamic changed in an instant. When Todd Monroe shoved his way under the tape, hair-plastered breath labored from hurrying, the shift became unmistakable. "There you are," Todd barked, trying to sound like he still controlled the room. "Corporate is blowing up my phone. They want you in for a—" He stopped mid-sentence as he took in the scene. Deputies standing beside Mark, EMTs nodding at him with gratitude. People wrapped in blankets pointing toward him like a lifeline. Lucy holding on to him like he was the safest place in the world. Todd's voice cracked. "What? What did you do?" Jenna turned, eyebrows raised. "He saved us. All of us." Todd paled. You went inside." No one answered him. They didn't need to. The county official stepped between them. "Mr. Delaney," he said, clearing his throat with formality. On behalf of the county, I want to formally thank you for your actions tonight. We owe you a debt we can't repay. Todd blinked. Debt? We suspended him. The official stared at Todd with something close to contempt. Then you clearly need better judgment at that warehouse. Todd's face went red, then green, then something in between. We'll reinstate him immediately, with back pay. I was just following procedure. Mark looked him square in the face, calm, unshaken. You didn't believe in me when it mattered. Todd's mouth opened, then closed like a fish gasping for air. He wasn't the only one looking small now. The neighbors who'd muttered about Mark, the parents who said he was dangerous, the people who'd whispered he wasn't fit to be around their kids. Every single one of them was watching him with a dawning realization they'd been wrong. Painfully, embarrassingly wrong. Jenna stepped closer, her voice steady. The county's crisis response committee is meeting next week, she said. They want insight from someone who understands real emergencies. Mark frowned. Why are you telling me this? Because they want you there. Her words were gentle, but certain. They need someone who knows what chaos feels like. Someone who can teach the rest of us how to respond instead of panic. The deputy added, honestly, we'd be lucky to have you consulting with us. People listen to you. They follow you. Blazerman nodded. There's also funding opening for a community safety coordinator. Training education crisis planning. You'd be perfect. Mark stared at them like they were speaking another language. He felt Lucy slip her hand into his small and warm, anchoring him. Daddy would be good at that, she said softly. Something inside him wavered. He'd spent years convinced he wasn't someone worth relying on anymore. That whatever courage he once had burned out overseas or on a rain-slicked Texas road where he couldn't save the one person who mattered most. But tonight proved something different. He wasn't broken. He wasn't dangerous. He wasn't unstable. He was a man who ran toward people when they cried for help, because he'd once promised himself he wouldn't let pain win again. And he was a father teaching his daughter what bravery looked like, not through stories or speeches, but through the quiet, stubborn courage of showing up when it counted. Jenna stepped beside him. You don't have to answer tonight, she said, but I hope you'll think about it. People need someone like you guiding these efforts, the deputy added. It's more than a job. It's a chance to shape how this town handles emergencies. A new chance, a new path. Something that didn't bury him in a warehouse under fluorescent lights. Something that didn't make him bite his tongue every time someone judged him without knowing a thing about his life. Something that might even let him use the parts of himself he'd tried so hard to shut down. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The rain tapered to a whisper. Mark looked at Lucy, her eyes red but shining. He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. You okay, Bug? He asked. She nodded. If you work there, will you be home more? He smiled softly. Probably. Then I think you should say yes. The officials exchanged hopeful glances. Jenna's lips curved into a small, grateful smile. Mark didn't give his answer, not yet. But he felt something shift inside him, quiet and steady, like a door he'd kept closed for years had finally cracked open. He stood from the tailgate, lifting Lucy into his arms as the last wisps of smoke rose behind them. The building was damaged. The town was shaken. Lives had nearly been lost. And in the middle of it all stood a man everyone thought they understood, until tonight proved they didn't know him at all. A man ready to face the decision that would change everything. By the next morning, word had spread farther than Mark ever expected. The parking lot outside the community center still smelled faintly of burned plastic, but people gathered anyway. Neighbors, teachers, even a few warehouse co-workers who had once kept their distance. This time they didn't avoid him. They approached him with small steps, quiet voices. A woman he barely knew placed a hand on his forearm and whispered, "Thank you for saving my mother." An older man he'd nodded to for years at the gas station apologized for the things he'd assumed. Parents from Lucy's school arrived carrying coffee and blankets, shame written across their faces as they admitted they had judged him wrongly. Even Todd Monroe showed up shivering under his too light windbreaker, his voice unsteady as he said, "I'm sorry, Delaney. I was wrong." He didn't try to make excuses, didn't pretend it wasn't personal. He simply looked like a man realizing he'd misread someone deeply and publicly. Mark nodded once. He wasn't angry anymore. He was tired, yes, but something lighter had settled inside him, as if the pressure he'd carried for years had finally eased off his ribs. The county officials returned before noon with an official offer in hand. A temporary emergency response coordinator role paid flexible hours training included with room to grow if he wanted it. They told him they needed someone who could teach the community how to stay calm in crisis, someone whose instincts were steady, someone who people trusted. For a long moment, Mark just stared at the folder in his hands. He felt Lucy slip her fingers around his. The decision wasn't hard after that. He said yes. The weeks that followed became a strange kind of healing. He shadowed local emergency crews, helped rewrite evacuation protocols, and trained volunteers on how to move through a crisis without freezing up. He worked 4 days a week instead of 6. He was home for dinner more often than not. And every night, Lucy added another paper star to her bedroom ceiling, a brighter sky in a home that felt steadier with each passing day. The warehouse didn't fight to keep him. They sent him a final check with back pay and a letter that read like someone's lawyer had written it. But when he dropped off his badge, more than one forklift driver walked over to shake his hand. A few even hugged him. One young woman he hardly knew whispered, "I feel safer knowing you're out there." He didn't expect that, but it mattered. Jenna recovered fully, though she walked with a cane for a while as her ribs continued to heal. She joined the county's safety committee, and over coffee one afternoon, admitted that the panic she felt trapped inside that smoke-filled room never fully left her, not until she saw him step through it. Their friendship grew in that slow, comfortable way that comes from surviving something together. She visited often, sometimes bringing Lucy little science kits or books about astronomy. As spring gave way to early summer, the community center reopened with updated alarms and modern sprinklers. The county let Mark cut the ribbon. Someone in the crowd joked about him running for office, and though people laughed, no one laughed at him the way they once had. On a warm June evening, he and Lucy stood outside their trailer watching the sunset stain the horizon orange and gold. She leaned against his leg, humming her favorite tune, and held a homemade telescope she'd built from a kit Jenna had given her. "Daddy," she said, suddenly, "you're different now." He kneeled beside her. "How so?" "You smile more." She nudged him gently with her shoulder. "And you don't look away when people talk to you." He thought about that. About the long years spent shrinking his presence, hoping the world wouldn't ask more of him than he felt he had left to give. About the moments when he didn't want to step forward but did anyway, for her. He wrapped his arm around her. "I guess I feel different." She nodded at the sky. "Can we look at the stars now?" "Yeah," he said, his voice warm. "Let's do that." She set the little telescope on a cinder block, squinting through it. "I can't see Saturn yet, but maybe someday." He smiled as she adjusted the focus. Someday. Behind them, the porch light flicked on, casting a soft glow across the yard. Mark looked at it, at the steady warmth against the dark, and felt something familiar and rare settle in his chest. Not the adrenaline of danger, not the hollow ache of loss. Peace. He never sought to be admired, never wanted the attention, but standing there with Lucy, whispering excitedly about a star she thought she'd found, and the soft hum of evening drifting through the air, he realized something. Respect wasn't the reward. Purpose was, and he'd finally found his again. Later, as he tucked Lucy into bed beneath her paper star ceiling, she caught his hand before he turned off the lamp. "Daddy," she murmured, half asleep. "You saved them because you're brave." He kissed her forehead. "I saved them because someone needed help." She smiled drowsily. "Same thing." He closed her door gently and stepped outside onto the porch. The air was cool, the sky clear, the stars scattered like promises across the Texas dark. He leaned against the railing, feeling the quiet settle deep. Some people think courage is loud, sirens, shouts, fireworks in the sky, but sometimes it's something else entirely. Sometimes it's the quiet choice to walk toward someone in need. Sometimes it's saying yes to a new beginning after years of believing you don't deserve one. And sometimes courage is simply the conviction to keep showing up every day even when no one's watching. That night, under the soft glow of his porch light, Mark understood that bravery doesn't always roar. Sometimes it gently whispers, "You're still here," and that's enough.